So today, we're diving into a really powerful report that documents, step by step, the dismantling of a democracy. We're going to follow its findings to understand how, over 3 short years, Pakistan's entire system was, well, fundamentally changed from the inside out.
You know, the report's foreword gives us the single most important idea for this whole story. And you can see it in this quote right here. This is not a story about a sudden military coup. Not at all. It's about a slow, procedural dismantling, a kind of death by 1,000 cuts, where the weapons of choice were the state's own laws and institutions.
So, to make sense of all this, the report gives us a framework it calls the anatomy of a collapse. It breaks the entire complex process down into 3 distinct, overlapping phases. Let's walk through them one by one.
Okay, first up we have Phase 1, Political Repression. The report argues that from April 2022 to May 2023, the battle really began on the streets as the machinery of the state was turned against its own citizens for political dissent.
What's so powerful about this is how you can literally see the escalation. The report argues these aren't just isolated incidents, but a clear, deliberate pattern. You see the pressure building. It starts with a crackdown on a march in May 2022, then an assassination attempt, and it all culminates in mass detentions a year later. It's a clear strategy to systematically neutralize the opposition.
So how exactly was this done? Well, the report details a very specific toolkit of repression. We're talking about using things like Section 144, that's a law banning public gatherings, to stop any peaceful protests before it starts, or filing what are called serial FIRs to basically trap opponents in the legal system indefinitely. The report's key insight here is that these legal tools weren't just used to manage crowds, they were weaponized to actually criminalize the very act of political opposition.
But this wasn't just some abstract legal strategy. The report then shows us the real, devastating human cost, putting a face to these systemic actions and revealing exactly who was being targeted.
And this is one of the report's most disturbing findings. It details what it calls gendered repression. The argument is that the unprecedented detention of these women, all listed here, wasn't random at all. It was a deliberate strategy to scare women, specifically, away from getting involved in politics. Just look at the case of Dr. Yasmeen, a 73-year-old cancer survivor held for months. It just shows how far this strategy went.
Then, the report details the gravest consequences of this repression: deaths in state custody. It documents multiple cases where political detainees died, alleging a pattern of deliberate medical neglect. The claim is absolutely chilling, that denying medical care became a kind of backdoor death sentence for prisoners who had not even been convicted of a crime.
Okay, now for Phase 2, Electoral Manipulation. The report argues that once the streets were under control, the focus shifted to something even more fundamental: controlling the ballot box itself.
Just look at this number, 80 plus. According to the report, that is the number of constituencies where the final election results were just declared, without the primary, verifiable data from the individual polling stations. This single statistic is used to show the massive scale of the alleged procedural breakdown on Election Day.
And this is a really crucial point in the report. The election was dismantled through process, not just brute force. It details a multi-pronged attack. The main opposition party was stripped of its electoral symbol, their candidates were arrested or blocked, and a nationwide internet blackout was imposed on Election Day. But the most critical move, it argues, happened during the vote count itself.
So to really grasp the report's argument, you have to understand this one specific document, the Form 45. Just think of it like the original receipt for the vote count at a single polling station. It's the foundational piece of evidence. The report's central claim is that in those 80-plus constituencies, these forms either vanished or were simply ignored, which means the final tally couldn't be verified against the original counts.
And this leads the report to ask a question that's so much more fundamental than just who won. It asks, how can you even have a democratic choice when the very system for counting and verifying the votes has been broken?
And that brings us to the final phase, constitutional capture. The report argues that with the election now secured, the last step was to rewrite the very rules of the game, to lock that power in place for good.
This slide shows the core changes the report documents. It's stark. On the left, you have the old system. On the right, the new one. And just look at the shift. Judicial appointments moved under executive control, a new parallel court was created to challenge the Supreme Court, and most critically, top officials were granted lifetime immunity from prosecution.
And these changes really set off alarm bells internationally.
The report is quick to note that major global legal bodies, we're talking everyone from the UN to the International Bar Association, all issued these stark warnings that the rule of law in Pakistan was facing a grave threat.
And this brings us right back to the central theme we started with. The report's conclusion on this phase is that the outward shell of democracy, parliament, courts, elections, it was all kept in place. But their internal mechanisms, the very things that provide for checks, balances, and accountability, had been completely hollowed out.
So what's the report's final analysis? When you put it all together, what does this all add up to?
Well, the report breaks down a chaotic rush of events into this incredibly clear three-step process. First, repression. Clear the opposition from the streets. Second, manipulation. Devalue their vote at the ballot box. And finally, third, capture. Rewrite the Constitution itself to make the new power structure permanent and completely unaccountable. And it all comes down to this one single chilling line from the report's conclusion. The institutions remain. Their purpose has changed. This is the core thesis right here. A state that still looks like a democracy on the outside, but now operates without any of the checks, balances, or accountability that actually give it meaning.
So the report doesn't end with a prediction. It ends with a question. By laying out this blueprint for how a democracy can be dismantled from the inside, using its own tools, it forces us to ask a question that applies far beyond any one country. When this happens, what on earth comes next?